We're going to be covering off quite a bit of territory today, and we've got some guests with us today and some experts who are going to help us through some of this. But this came about because of the work we've been doing around sustainability documentation. And in particular, we're going to target or talk about embodied carbon documentation as well today. So, which is really important for product partners to understand how it can be useful to you. So we've also got Edge Impact with us today, and I'll introduce the guys a little bit later. But first of all, I'm just going to précis why we're doing this and why it's important for product partners. So if you haven't noticed before, Masterspec has put out a new piece of production system, which is called eCert. So eCert is basically sustainability documentation for architects. And why did we do that? Well, architects asked us to. So it's a new piece of functionality, and they've approached us to try and help solve a problem for them. So trying to find sustainability information is really time consuming for architects because they have to go everywhere to look for it. And often they can't actually get the content that they want. And then trying to compare that documentation against other sets of documentation to make product choices is also difficult for them. They're trying to make informed decisions. But they also want to be able to substantiate that information. So in other words, is the documentation in date? Is it true? Is it correct? Is it something that I can rely on? So they were asking us those sorts of questions as well. And often finding that maintained content is difficult because you've got to go and get it again if it's running out of date every year. You've got to go and find the content again and again. And then often the problem they had was trying to sync that documentation back to their product documentation. In other words, how do I get it into the specification? How do I make it part of the documentation set? So these are questions that were all asked of us by architects, and we came around and basically looked for a solution, which was eCert. So eCert basically covers off a range of documentation. So we currently include this set of documentation. Why this set? It's the set that architects asked us for. It's the set that they're using reasonably regularly. Now, we don't pretend to be able to cover everything because there is a lot of documentation sets out there. But what we have done is looked at documentation that is third-party verified. This documentation set is all third-party verified. We basically check it, substantiate that it's in date, and then we make it part of the specification. So the thing about eCerts now is that instead of like MDocs, which is our original system, which still is functional and will still work, basically eCert is actually included within the specification. So if they include this documentation, it slides it in a scheduling clause, which I'll show you a little later. So it's updated in the specification and also in a schedule. So it's available to whoever uses the specification, whether that's the council, whether that's the constructor, or whether it's on the back end of the system where people are actually trying to get points for systems that they've used within inside the building. In other words, a proof source. So we basically create a schedule, and it helps the architect speed up that system for them. It also maintains it for them because it takes the stuff out that goes out of date. But it also allows them to produce documentation quickly, clearly, and concisely about what they're trying to achieve. So that's what eCert is about. Now, Masterspec has taken a proactive response to this, and we actually preloaded an amount of documentation beforehand. So we looked through sets for EPD, Eco-Choice, Declare, etc., and preloaded as much documentation to make it as useful for architects as possible. So we did that in November. And now I think there is somewhere in the region of 750 odd documents sitting inside Masterspec now. I think it was 500 on the first load, but now you can actually show us which documentation you also might want to load, and we can do that for you as well. So it's a growing set is what I'm saying effectively in this space. So we're actually partnering up today, and we're going to have a little discussion with Edge. So Edge Impact Consulting have a range of services across the range. Now, I'll introduce you to a couple of guys we're going to talk to today. So Jonas is a global director for Impact. I think he's one of the founding partners based in Sydney. And also with us, we're lucky enough to have David as well, who's the the regional principal based in Auckland here for us. And both of the guys will give us some insights into documentation or sustainability documentation. So we'll look forward to that in a minute, but I'll just carry on for a second. They're based across the world, so they deal with a whole range of people, and they are experts in sustainability documentation, as you saw before. And hopefully we can all deduce a little bit more out of this. So one of the things that I'd ask you is, as you go along today, if you see or want to ask any questions, use the Q&A function at the top there. Pop your questions in there and we'll deal with them all at the end, and hopefully we'll have a bit of debate at the end, and I hope we spend quite a bit of time being able to basically use the guys' knowledge and actually extract something for them that's useful for you as product partners. So eCert, the scope, what does it cover? Well, we covered off the range of documents that it does cover. It basically works as a comparison document. We are open to adding further formats, but it's not just these formats that architects can load. They can go in and load their own documentation set if they want to. They can take information off MDocs and also put it in here. It's not restricted to these documentation sets only. They can add their other documentation if they want to into eCerts, which would add it to the scheduling clause. So it's not limited in any way. So it's primarily a comparison tool set up front to allow the architect to make an assessment, but it also allows them to do a little bit of research and compare CBI ranges. So I'm going to try and do that for you now, just to quickly give you a bit of an understanding of what it looks like. So this is just a specification I've got open, and I'm going to go and have a look at what sort of documentation I might want to include. So if I'm looking at roofing, you'll see across here the little leaves along here, which basically indicate that there is sustainability information available against these work sections. So I'm going to click the top one here, and it's now looking at 4311 profiled metal roofing, and it's looking at the documentation sets that are available inside the system here. So I can have a look at these and compare them. But the cool thing about it is, if I'm an architect and designer, I can make some choices and say, look, I want to look at profile plastic roofing, and I also want to look at plywood roofing, and I can add CBIs along the top here. I'll just turn off those without eCerts. And now I can see a range of documentation, different CBI sets together. And if I want to, I can then randomly here just pick a few. I can go and compare up to 4 sets of documentation and have a look at those before I've even made a choice as to what I'm doing, or put a work section in. So I can look at the documentation sets. I can export them, print them, basically download them, and have a look at the documentation set if I want to. In this particular case here, I've got a couple of documents here, so I can actually just quickly roll through them. Here I've got an FFC, chain of custody, and a certificate report, so I can actually swap between the two. And if I want to, and I've made my decision or made a choice, I can basically go on to do that. So I'm just going to download a section randomly here. It's showing me the work sections information set that's with it. I can then basically decide which document sets I want. And then I can do the Q&A. So I've actually downloaded those. Well, I'm going to include these documents with it. I'm just going to quickly, just for speed, just rip through this. And when I add the document, you'll see it includes the scheduling clause. So inside the system for your work section, you will have the scheduling clause, and here it sits at 1.5. Those are the documents that I included. So it tells me what type of document, the certification number, the document name, and when it expires. So the document will not feature if it expires effectively in the system. It also puts in a new work section here, 1236S1, which is a scheduling work section, and it'll now show me all of the documentation sustainability-wise that I've included as an architect in here, and this will be automatically updated off the scheduling clauses. So if I remove a document or add a document at any point, it will change this list. And if you look in the back of a work section, of the work sections now, or the project, it has an eCert appendix next to MDocs. So the eCert appendix now features what we've included. And very much like MDocs, it tells you the amount of documents that are available, but the documents that you do have. And if you want to, you can include or exclude documents. And here, if I remove that document and then go back to the work section, which was Diamond, the work section is now updated. The scheduling clause has now removed that. Same thing, if I wanted to, as an architect, I could add my own documentation set as well. So it's really useful to them. We're getting great feedback from architects and designers saying that they are using the tool set. They are now able to make some comparisons. And as a product partner, I'd encourage you, if you wanted to add your documentation if it's not there. So we've gone through and proactively tried to load as much as we can, but we can't be over everything. So if you think we've missed something, you can forward your documentation to us. So let me just show you how to do that. So under your supplier tab, you will see the eCerts Manage tab down here. You will see what we've previously loaded if you have documentation in here. But I'll just move this out of the way. But just over here, you can see whether they're published and when it was published, what it's published against. And you can either withdraw or replace the document. If you have an upgrade to document and you want to put a new document in, use the replace, because effectively that handles the product for the actual subscriber. It actually handles if they have updated the document so that it gives them a replacement document, removes the old document as the new document, rather than withdrawing the document and adding a new document. Actually use the replace if it's like for like. And that's basically how you do it over here. The upload document here, and just in here, you'll need to fill in a baseline set of information. So basically choose the file. It must be a PDF for us. Give the name, give it the date, all right? So you need to give it a date of when it expires. The review date is for you to put in if you want to. It's not a requirement. It will give it a review date 1 month before this date. So just leave it blank if you're just going to do it. The reason we've left your review date is if you know that you want to review that product set because you're going to make a change to it at a certain date and you know that in advance, you might want to put a reminder in. That's what the review date is for. Put the document title in and, previous. Basically, you can put in your email in here or anyone else's email who might want to know, because if the document, for some reason, we need to contact you, that's the email address we'll go to. And you can put in an optional email address if you're away or something, or you want someone else to also to handle it. You can actually put their email address in there. So we've got 2 points of contact, and then it's a simple case of pushing upload. Our specifiers will not get it until our editor team, has looked at the document, assessed it, checked it, and then it publishes up to the system. So that might take us 24 hours, 48 hours to have a look at the documentation set. We're alerted to it, and then we push it back out to the subscriber base, so they have a third-party verified document that they can go and use in this space. So I'll just hand over now to Jonas, who's going to talk to us a little bit about all those documentation sets and what they mean, and for product partners, what you might want to use or how you might want to use them. Again, I'd encourage you to use the Q&A, please. So if you've got any questions about what Jonas is talking about, or David, just put them in there and we'll go and deal with them at the end. So I'd like to hand over to you guys now. Thanks very much for your time and welcome.
Thanks, Mark. Let's see first that the screen is working here. You see my? Yeah, perfect. Kia ora, and thank you for the opportunity to share some thoughts and insights from the world of product transparency and environmental labeling. As Mark said, we'll hope we get some questions and discussion in the end, but I'll start off with some content here. We did the introduction. So what I want to talk about is provide an overview of the environmental labeling market, talk a little bit specifically about what the New Zealand Green Building Council is doing, do a bit of a deep dive into EPDs, or environmental product declarations, and then finish off by talking about alternative options to EPDs and potentially a more gradual process to get into this space for people that are looking to, or companies that are looking to enter. So maybe start off with taking a step back and look at the environmental labeling or eco-labeling, it's a very large space. There's a lot of labels and certifications out there. There's a website that tracks this. It's called the Ecolabel Index, and I've counted that there's globally about 456 eco-labels across a range of countries. Almost every country have one at least, and they're covering a broad range of different industry sectors. So just get your head around what all this means is quite a task, and also part of the reasons why we're here today. There is a great deal of interest and benefit in labeling, both for product partners and manufacturers, because it helps them substantiate claims, meet market demand, gain competitive advantage. It's often referenced on a way to get into green building ratings and infrastructure rating projects. It helps you benchmark and check where your performance is at through the process and compare to competitors. Some jurisdictions require some sort of labeling and certification for imported products. It also provides insights that can help decarbonize your supply chain and your product, and opportunities to drive innovation. And for your customers, the architects and builders and designers and specifiers, they're looking to make more informed choices. They're looking to drive sustainability increasingly, and they also want to show that they've shown responsibility and make the right choices when it comes to the products that they use in the projects. So there's a lot of reasons to get engaged in this space, but it is a relatively complex area, as you probably all know. And to start off with, to look at the different types of labels that are out there. There are product-specific certifications that focus on specific building products, and some of them are multi-attribute, so they look at a range of different environmental and or social aspects. So they're trying to be as holistic as possible when it comes to certification of sustainability. Examples there would be Green Rate, Global Green Rate, Eco Choice, environmental product declarations. They're all quite broad and holistic in approach. But there's also single issue certifications. So examples there would be Green Tag, which has one certification that focuses specifically on modern slavery transparency. Toitu, also very much a single issue in terms of carbon reduce, where they're looking at a certification or declaration that's focused specifically on embodied carbon and combating climate change. There are other labeling types that are material focused. So there's PEFC and FSC, which focused on sustainable timber and wood. There's a certification for best environmental practice PVC, which is very much around the intricacies of those materials and what's best practice in those areas. And then you obviously have the building level certifications that operate differently and reference a lot of these product and material focused certifications. One way to look at this is through the lens of the ISO classifications. So to the left, you see a bit of a scatter of a number of different labels and certifications that are out there. The ISO world categorized them into three types. So type 1 is a voluntary third-party certified eco-label. There's an ISO standard 14024 for that, those certifications. There's a type 2, which is around doing self-declarations. So it's more of a guiding document or standard, not something you can get certified against. And then you have the type 3, which is the standard for environmental product declarations. And if you look at the diagram to the right there, that's essentially how the type 1 and type 3 classes work. So on the x-axis, you have environmental performance ranging from non-compliant or low to high performing, and then the share of the market on the y-axis. And the eco-label, the type 1, is about the leading segment, so the top 20% or 15% that have that outstanding highest performance. So that's the role of the type 1 eco-label. So when you see Eco Choice or Green Tag, that's about these products have met very high and stringent requirements and standards. The type 3 EPD is about transparency. So essentially they're available for all compliant products or legal products. And it's about offering comparability and transparency, not about higher environmental performance. That's not what that label is about. And then you have a large number of different certifications and labels that don't fall into any of these ISO categories. In this world, to make a little bit more sense of it, the Green Building Council in Australia and New Zealand have developed a responsible products program, which essentially looks at 5 different categories. So to look at the product from the lens of responsible, healthy, positive, circular, and leadership. And if you as a manufacturer can demonstrate certifications or commitments in all of these or some of these categories, they will reward point for the broadest possible coverage. They don't really reward that you have all your certifications focused on, say, responsible or everything in healthy. They want to see a broad range across these different categories and give responsible product value points, essentially, that feeds into the Green Star rating tool. So this is a credit or program that's developed to kind of make more sense and clarify the space of certifications and labeling for products in the built environment. So as Mark talked about the eCert and what Masterspec is doing, they're picking up the key ones of the certifications and declarations that are out there. So we have the EPD, which I'll do a little bit of a deep dive into, which is about providing verified life cycle assessment data. So it's a bit more than that, but that's the core of it. It applies to products. It's an international system, so you can really compare with and use it regardless of market in the world. It's not a national kind of initiative. We have the Declare label, which is about more what's in the product, not the environmental impact of producing or using the product, but the ingredients that are in there, if there are any red listed substances, etc. And it's also seen as an international scheme. We have TOI2 EnviroCare, which is focused on the climate impact and carbon. Is about reducing greenhouse gas emissions. But there's also an EnviroMark, which is around the organization, not the product, and their environmental management approach and systems. It's predominantly focused on the New Zealand market, but recognized outside in some areas as well. We have EcoChoice, Aotearoa, which is about that highest performance, high environmental performance. This is a type 1 eco-label. It's have a long-standing history in New Zealand. It used to be called Good Environmental Choice New Zealand, rebranded. It's been around for a long time. It's very trusted. As well as Global Green Tag, which is competing, I suppose. Also type 1 eco-label. With quite a broad global footprint as well, but started off and headquartered in Australia. And then you have the 2 sustainable timber certifications, FSC and PEFC. So these are the ones that are currently in Masterspec's eCert program, and a little bit snapshot in terms of what they do, and that they're not all the same. They deliver different functions. So taking a step back and look at when we evaluate building product certifications, what are the key things to look for? And one is the third-party verification. You do want to have certifications that not self-declared. You want to look at that someone has checked the homework and checked the credentials. So third-party verification is important. Looking at the scope as well of a product is important. So for example, we can look at the FSC and Declare labels from the previous slide. They're more focused on the cradle to gate, what happened up to the product as it's manufactured. It doesn't really look at the downstream in terms of installation, use, and end of life too much. Some certifications look at the whole life cycle, so it's important to pay attention to what's actually covered off by the certification and the comparability and metrics as well. You do want to pick the product that deliver a function and compare to the function it delivers, and make sure that delivers the best outcome. So, for example, it doesn't make sense to compare a ton of timber versus a ton of steel, because when you put them into a frame or a building, they deliver very different functions per unit of mass, for example. And then look at the relevance. What am I actually want to get sorted with this certification, and does it fit other factors are really important, such as durability, quality, fit for purpose, etc. So it's quite a lot to kind of keep in mind when evaluating products, and not just pick it has a certification and that's a good enough for me. You really need to look at what it delivers. And of all those criteria that I mentioned on the previous slide, what to look for, they're relevant for environmental product declarations. They do declare very clearly they're third-party verified. They look at comparable scope, functional unit, etc. So that's why I want to do a bit of a deep dive into EPDs. It's also been a topic of a lot of growth and discussions, so it's quite relevant to see what's going on here. And what is an EPD, or environmental product declaration? It's essentially an independently verified and registered document that's free for charge to access, that provide transparent and comparable LCA, or life cycle environmental impact of products. It enables you to include, compare, and view the embodied carbon components, but it also looks at a way broader set of environmental parameters. I think it's up to 40 different categories of environmental and resource impacts that's declared in an EPD. And they are, because of the transparency and the recognition and rigor, they're also referenced in infrastructure, sustainability, and Green Star and other ratings. In Australasia, so Australia and New Zealand, the program started about 10 years ago. And over that time, we've seen about 100+ companies adopted and published EPDs. So there's now currently around 300 EPDs published and growing. Internationally, there's about 120,000 EPDs, and there's also a number of different programs internationally that operate in this space. So when we look at this growing area, it's important to keep in mind that it's an international system. There are international and European standards that are governing this. And one of the appeals of the EPD is that it provides this almost like an environmental nutrition label for products. It gives you, instead of calories and fat and whatnot, it gives you energy, global warming potential, water, waste, etc. So it's useful from that perspective. But you can see that globally, the green here is where there are recognized EPD programs. And in some countries that are in regions, there are even 2 or 3 programs operating. So there's a lot of pressure in terms of keeping this consistent and make sure that everyone follows the same rules and the same governance and rigor. And what's underpinning EPDs is the life cycle assessment method. I'm sure most of you are very familiar with this. It's an international standardized method to cover the cradle to grave of a product and look at not just one, but multiple relevant environmental impacts along that value chain. And one of the main benefits of life cycle assessment is that it allows you to look at burden shifting. So make sure that you don't just have a good raw material in manufacturing, but also what's the environmental impact and load once the product is distributed, used, deconstructed, and end of life. And also look at this across a broad range of different environmental impact categories, because you might be reducing carbon, but if that means increasing water or land clearance, you need to look at those trade-offs. And LCA is designed to clarify and help make those decisions. When we look at construction products, they have a very specific way of classifying the life cycle. So they divide it into different stages and different modules. So you'll see here product stage, and again, I know many of you or most of you are very familiar with this. The product stage, for example, is labeled A1 to A3, where A1 is raw materials, A2 is transport, A3 is your manufacturing inputs and impact. And then you have the A4 transport to site, A5, the installation, fuel, and impacts and inputs and outputs from the construction process, and so on. This is for construction product in terms of how they divide it up. And if we now look at the concept of embodied carbon, there's a number of different definitions. Typically, when people talk about embodied carbon, they actually intuitively mean the A1 to A3 modules. So what's embodied in terms of carbon emissions up until the manufacturing stage. A concept that was introduced a couple of years ago, driven by the World Green Building Council, was the concept of upfront embodied carbon, which is including not just the A1 to A3, but also the transport to site and the fuel and emissions associated with the construction and installation. So that's upfront embodied carbon. And then you have the concept of life cycle embodied carbon, which essentially covers everything: use, maintenance, repair, deconstruction, recycling, recovery, but it excludes the operational aspects, so the thermal performance of the building or the operational water, but it covers pretty much everything else in life cycle embodied carbon. So lots of EPDs out there. How can I tell that the EPD that I'm looking at is legitimate? I personally use a 4-point kind of checklist that helps me just look at the credibility of an EPD and the use of it as well. So the first thing I look for is the comparability. EPDs are about to be comparable. I want it to be done according to the EN 15804 standard, which is designed specifically for building products for the construction industry. There are EPDs that are just following the ISO 14025, but that's a generic standard, and it's not doesn't divide up the, for example, the life cycle into the modules that we looked at before. So it's of less use for me. I want the EN 15804. And after 120,000 EPDs internationally, there's actually only about a third that use the EN 15804 standard. So that's one thing to look for. The second part is about an EPD should be comprehensive. There's quite a lot of information required. It's not a one-pager. It's not a fact sheet. That's not an EPD. They need to be verified. So manufacturers and consultants can produce them, but they need to be checked by qualified verifiers. That's a requirement. And in Australasia, through the EPD Australasia program, there's currently about 14 approved verifiers. 13 of those are very qualified, and then I'm there as well. And the check there is that we check the LCA background report to make sure that all the modeling has been done right, and then that the public-facing EPD document that goes into market represent factually what's true about the product from the LCA perspective. So they can't be self-declared. They need to be verified, and they need to be published through a credible program. As I mentioned, there are about 40 programs internationally. And the role of the program is to make sure that the rules are there, they're followed, that they're updated, that the verifiers are credible, etc. So how can I, from all these 40 different programs, how can I tell if it's a legitimate program, if it's, say, an international program? Look for the Eco platform logo. That's essentially a club or an organization that where all the member EPD programs are joining and checking and kind of self-governing and make sure that everyone follows the best practice. So what does this mean in practice? This is an example of the first 3 pages of an environmental product declaration from Boral in Australia. So I would open up this document and I will go to the front page. I will see it has this Eco platform. It's from EPD Australasia. I know and I trust that program. It's in accordance with not just ISO 14025, but also EN 15804. And it's clear that it's still valid. It's clear what the geographical scope. So I can use this for projects in Victoria in Australia, but it's actually not published and relevant for the New Zealand market in this instance. The reason is that it's a cement product, so they haven't factored in the distribution outside the state of Victoria. So it's only covering the impact up until manufacturing gate. Going back and look at the second page of the EPD, I can see that all the key aspects that's supposed to be in an EPD are there. It's not a one-page fact sheet, obviously. It's a comprehensive document covering all the key aspects. And then the third page, it's clear who's owning this, the EPD operator, who helped produce the EPD, in this case, Rob Rouet, and who did the third-party verification, Andrew Moore. And both of these are outstanding experts in their field and highly trusted. So 3 pages, the first 3 pages helped me kind of satisfy that I will trust this EPD as a very legitimate and good practice, high standard. Now, those of you on the call here today that have EPDs probably have experienced that there's been quite a lot of there's been changes over the last couple of years, and there's more changes coming to the rules and the program instructions. It's been a bit of a frustration for manufacturer because they might be in the process of producing an EPD and then the rules change along the way, and then they have to rethink the approach to doing it and adapt. So that's been a bit of a frustration, and for those of you that experienced that, I just want to shed some light into why this is and what's going on. So EPD Australasia started about 10 years ago. When we set it up, we utilized the international EPD system, which is part of a global network. We were actually the first international member to set up a program based on this system. So we are a little bit linked to the international EPD system, and it's based in Europe, actually Sweden. I'm Swedish, I take no responsibility, but it has a natural focus on the European market. And in the European market, sustainability is driven quite hard, and they focus on circular economy, and they've crafted this European Green Deal, which is driving a lot of the member states' sustainability initiatives. Part of the Green Deal is the eco-design for sustainable product regulation. And this is about setting performance and information condition for building products. And part of this, kind of scaling down the onion here, part of this is the concept of the digital product passport. So intuitively, we can all get what that means. That's essentially a information set that should be carried with all products in the economy. And EPDs are expected to play a significant role in implementation of this digital product passport. So as this is developing in Europe, since we're linked to the international EPD system, we get dragged along in a lot of these changes, which are actually not yet relevant for the Australian and New Zealand market. It might come in the future, but it's not the agenda of our governments at the moment to the same extent as the Europeans. So that's why there's a little bit of development and maybe push ahead of the curve in terms of many of these spaces. It's good for those of you who export into Europe, but for domestic use, it's a little bit overkill, I would say, at the moment. One thing I mentioned before is the eco platform. So I just want to talk a little bit about that and why that's a good thing to some extent. So the eco platform is where the EPD program operators, green building councils, trade associations, data and tool providers and manufacturers get together to kind of drive best practice in the environmental product declaration space, which is a good thing from a governance and transparency and rigor perspective. But one thing that resource that they develop is the eco portal. So that's about making EPDs digitally accessible. And they've essentially draw in environmental product declarations from a lot of different programs. There's about 15,000, almost 15,000 EPDs on this platform and growing. Some of them are from Australia, some of them are from New Zealand. But this is a little bit aligned to what eCert is trying to do as well, to create this accessible database of EPDs internationally. And the benefit here is that this opens up for API integration. So this makes the EPDs accessible to modeling software, LCA tools, material libraries, and specification tools as well. This is a bit happening now and under development, but this is a great opportunity to kind of automate and tap into the world of EPDs, which traditionally has been about sifting through PDFs, but this is making it much more sophisticated, if you will. So another reason to get, I suppose, engaged in EPDs is that this is going to be open up for EPDs to be more widely used and embodied carbon information. But question is, all this talk about EPDs, is this really the only option that's out there? Should I invest in this? We can talk a little bit about kind of the cost and kind of what's involved in EPD development, but it's quite a lot. So you have to pick your program operator. You have to have a product category rule that you need to follow. You then have to work out and determine what's the scope of the product of the EPD that I'm going to do here. There's a data collection and LCA modeling involved. There's developed that report for the LCA and the EPD that needs to be verified by an approved verifier. There's a bit of back and forth to correct everything, and then you need to produce a public-facing document and register it with a program. So obviously there's a lot of work involved in this, and there's a cost that attached to it as well. And there's a lot of data that sits behind this. It's a rigorous process. You want to make sure that when you compare EPDs that have all gone through the same rigor and same depth. So data collection is key, and 12 months of production data is required, which might be a barrier to some new products where you just want to launch them with a credential, but you don't have that track record of 12 months quite yet. There's some assumptions involved in the data collection as well. You know your raw materials, your transport, your manufacturing, but downstream and use of the product, that there's a bit of, you need to establish credible scenarios for that as well. So there's a lot of work going into this. So what we've heard is a lot that this is too hard for us at the moment. It costs too much, it takes too long. What other options are there? So we've been talking a lot to industry and thinking about this in terms of there are actually more of a gradual process that manufacturers specifically can take, because at the end of the day, the purpose is not to produce a verified shiny EPD or certification. At the end of the day, we want to see demonstration of year-on-year product level carbon reductions and environmental reductions. That's really the purpose, right? We need to improve. And you don't need to go to a shiny EPD to do that. You can start with a generic LCA adaptation. And what I mean by that is that, say you're a brick manufacturer, there's a large number of EPDs and LCAs that's been done on bricks before. It's known what the inputs and outputs are. Your brick, even though you haven't done an LCA or EPD for your product specifically, you can use other people's work and understand what the hotspots are and what the key areas of improvements are over the life cycle, and then start investigating what you can do to improve. And then you can start building up by supplementing in your key data like gas production, gas use and distribution, and refine it and make it look more and more like your product. You can then go to a full product carbon footprint. You can then go to have that third party verified. You can then go and broaden it out to make it a verified EPD, and then benchmark or go for the Ecolabel certification if you have outstanding environmental performance. But the key here is really about year-on-year product level reduction. Transparency is important along the way, but it's more about the reduction. So along the way as well, we have to be careful what we say. So if you only done a generic LCA adaptation, you can talk about that you're taking the initial steps, but you shouldn't say that I now have a fully measured and verified carbon footprint, obviously. Even if you have a full peer-reviewed or full verified carbon footprint, you can then talk about the act of being transparent. But just because you know your numbers doesn't mean you have a low carbon or that you're most environmentally friendly option. So important along the way is to moderate the language and make sure that you don't overstate your claims, because that will certainly get you into trouble for greenwashing. This all links together, the EPDs and Ecolabels. So I just want to chime in, David, quickly, if you wouldn't mind, just to talk a little bit about what we're doing with EcoChoice and our work together there.
Cool. Yeah, thanks, Jonas. You needed probably a bit of a rest there. So yeah, as Jonas pointed out, EcoChoice Aotearoa, also the eco-labeling agency here in New Zealand. And from talking to them, we sort of realized that the people they work with are often overlap with the ones that we talk to. So often if you've got an eco-label, you've already invested quite a lot of time in meeting the EcoChoice Aotearoa standards. And that involves actually a big part collecting data. A lot of you guys will be nodding your heads to this, which is often the pain point as well for developing LCAs and EPDs. So just naturally, when talking to the EcoChoice team, we sort of identify an opportunity to help organizations that have gone down the track of doing an eco-label to be able to then do an EPD with EcoChoice through us. And what we can do there, the benefit is we can there's the synergy in terms of leveraging all the data collection you've already done for that eco label. So that's really the pain point we're trying to address. So in our experience, doing an EPD, Jonas might talk about that, takes between 4 to 6 months. And then you've got the verification process. The biggest pain point is the data collection. That's our experience, and that can take months. Depending how much you can invest in terms of time. So being able to leverage the fact that you've already collected that to quite a degree can help us save time and effort. Back to you, Jonas.
Thanks, David. Just to close off, last slide is our second last slide is we published a bit of a roadmap and thought leadership piece on this as well in terms of how to make the carbon disclosure specifically more accessible. So if you want to read more about kind of that graduation process that I've mentioned before and that we talked about, there's a paper out there that we worked with the Green Building Councils and some certification bodies and manufacturers to kind of try to get this right and try to kind of democratize carbon disclosure, if you will. So in closing, the environmental labeling space, I've been working with this for 20 years and many of you the same time or more, and it's a little bit of a confusing and ever-evolving space. The New Zealand Green Building Council and Australian Green Building Council Responsible Product Programme is a great step forward to kind of structure and organize this. Masterspec's eCert is a great initiative to make this more structured and more organized as well and more transparent. EPDs have been seen as the gold standard for transparency and comparability, but as many of you know, it requires a bit of investment. And at the end of the day, we need to accelerate decarbonisation of the built environment, and we need to move faster in this area. So we all have a job to do to talk to the green building councils, talk to the regulators of this world and decision makers to make sure that they reduce the barriers and make it easier. We just want progress. We want reductions. We don't want perfection. So I'll close there and see if we have any questions or comments from the team.
Brilliant, thanks, Jonas. Just before we do that, I just want to also just cover off. Masterspec has been working on just an adaptation or a move forward from eCert. So we're also, if you didn't know, working with BRANZ to produce an embodied carbon repository for New Zealand. So the first steps of that are well underway. But at the same time, we realise that you guys also might want to load that information, and that might be an EPD or an LCA or any other third-party verified embodied document that you might want to consider. So basically, we're taking submissions for that stuff now, because as we go forward, obviously, we're going to build this database and we want to be able to include the information from product manufacturers. There's no cost to do that. We are doing it for NZ Inc. to make sure that there is a New Zealand carbon repository for construction available for people. The idea is that we'll put a public website out first. You can load your documentation here. Effectively, you can get your PDF, put it into the system, add your company name and details, and submit it, and we will hold it and put it into the system when it becomes available. So you can do that right now. If you already have your EPD with us on Masterspec, you don't need to do that. We've got it already. We'll include it in the system. But if you're not a product supplier through Masterspec and you need to be included, you can put it in here if you want to. So the idea is that we've just launched part 1 of this, which is eCerts, and obviously we are looking to actually push this along through the year, and later on this year we'll be putting out, as I said, this public website. The idea being is that eventually we'll get to the point where we can actually, after the public website, put in a third-party tool set, an API, to be able to draw that information off that and make it available to anybody who needs it, whether that's a BIM software, or whether that's other partners, or whether it's government or any other interest party that needs carbon information that's NZ centric. So effectively we make that available to the wider industry as a whole, for industry good. So that's the plan, if you like, going forward. I just want to lean back now, go back to our questions really. So I just wanted to make sure everybody is aware that was available to you. So let's just stop sharing that. We'll go back to the page. I've got a couple of questions actually I wanted to ask you, Jonas, because I know that basically you create EPDs and other documentation set. In fact, you verify other people's documentation. Just the question that I had, I suppose, was LCAs versus EPDs. Now, I hear that a lot, obviously, but LCAs, obviously, you need an LCA to create an EPD. Why? What do they do? What's the difference between the two? And, is there any advantage in either or do I need one or both?
Short answer, LCAs are incredibly difficult to read and kind of penetrate unless you're an expert. So the EPD is about comparing a consistent, comparable format of the LCA. So it's really to make LCAs more accessible and comparable. That's the role of them.
Yeah. So I'm putting a product partner hat on here or a supplier hat. They're incredibly expensive to go and do. Is there any way that we can, as a company or a supplying organization, make it cheaper or more affordable or more accessible, or is there another methodology to get your carbon information in there? So two parts. Is there another way of doing it, or is there a way of making it cheaper to get through to the gold standard, if you like?
There are many options, and I invite to talk to people in this field, and we're more than happy to talk about this as well, because there are ways to make it cheaper. You can use the tools that might reduce the cost and effort, and you can take it more in-house. You have to make that choice very carefully. You might invest in systems to make it automate how you produce the EPDs, if you know you're going to be in this game for a long time. There's also a gradual process that I mentioned before, that it's actually probably more rational and cost effective if you ramp it up rather than go for a big investment upfront that might be too much. You might not have the manpower or resources internally to take it on, and it might drag out. So lots of ways to reduce the cost, absolutely. And also in some product specific spaces, there are very established third-party tools, like for example for concrete and some other products that are there for that specific purpose to make it streamlined.
Okay. So when I'm looking at a whole lot of EPDs and the one thing that sort of obviously you need to go and get is a whole lot of information, right? So you need to get all your data set. Is there any value in actually trying to gather that yourself beforehand before you engage in this and, actually put it together yourself to start with? Is that a way of keeping the cost down?
Yes, 100%. I think that's actually a very good way to approach it. Get in touch with an EPD expert and tell me, I want to get started. What should I do? And they will probably give you really good guidance upfront, free of charge, in terms of what's required, and then you can check if you're ready to go.
Okay, all right. So what's the cost of general cost? What would the cost be? I mean, how long's a piece of string? I suppose I'm asking that question.
Yeah, I'll try to be as direct as possible rather than skirt around the topic. But you have to invest a few tens of thousands of dollars at least. That's typically the minimum if you want to use an external consultant or a tool. And this is not including the internal time that you need to invest, but the external cost would be maybe around starting point would be 30K for a consultant. If it's a big product range or complex, it will increase. Verifier at another 5-10K, and then there's a couple of grand for registration and aspects. So that's ballpark what we're looking at, and it typically takes, as David said, hard to do it faster than 4 or 5 months. And sometimes when there's not enough resources to pull the data and the process goes slow, it can take up to a year, but that's a little bit more of the exception.
So there's
Mark, can I jump in?
Go for it.
A quick bit of a tip. What I've learned as well from dealing with this last few years is what is a good success factor if you're a manufacturer wanting to embark in this journey is making sure you appoint someone in your organization that will be the point of contact. It sounds obvious, but having pretty much a project lead on the client side, in our experience, really speeds things up massively, because they're the ones that can sort of help problem solve some of the data issues and the day-to-day logistics. So that's like the hot tip that I've picked up.
Yeah. And someone's also said to me that sometimes a shortcut is if you're doing the LCA, you can actually get part of the LCA verified. So without going to the step of an EPD, you can actually maybe get part of the LCA verified, and that might be a cheaper way of doing it too.
Marginally, I would say, because a lot of the work, most of the work goes into doing the LCA. And once you've done that, you might as well publish it as an EPD.
Yeah. Okay. And what about the scope of an LCA? If you narrow the scope of an LCA, does that reduce the cost?
There are rules around that you should include as much as possible, and there are mandatory. So you can't really do that unless you have a legitimate reason, like the cement EPD that I showed before. You don't know what product it's going to go into, what form, so that's limited to cradle to gate. But if you have a panel or something, then you need to cover the whole life cycle. That's the requirement.
Yeah. And the other thing I've had reached out to me as well is not everybody in New Zealand product partners are actually manufacturers. Some of them are suppliers of someone else's product. They import it or bring it in. So if someone actually has an international EPD, is there a value in that international EPD? Can they bring it in? Does it work?
Yeah, that's actually a little bit of efficiency or shortcut if you can do that. You might want to check what the geographical scope of the EPD is, if it covers New Zealand. Otherwise, there are options to add on to it, and some even republish it under their own brand, but adding the relevant components of getting to the New Zealand market and being used in the New Zealand market.
So you need someone else, if you're going to republish it or rebrand it, you'd need someone else to do that, to verify it?
Yeah, you need someone else to verify it. But all most of the impact up to manufacturing, if it's through a legitimate EPD program, you can use it straight off and just add a small component. And the cost that I quoted before will be significantly less. Yeah.
So, you talked about EN 15804 and the 14025, the two versions. Is there a cost difference between those two, or again?
So they really build on each other. That the EN 15804 is specific for construction products, so they're completely compatible. There's no real cost difference. It's just that the EN 15804 actually makes it more prescriptive, exactly what you need to do. So it should be more efficient. Yeah.
Okay. And A1 to A3 is basically if you like, the embodied carbon, say A4, A5. You talk about upfront embodied carbon, and so that's applicable if it's, say, a manufacturer in Germany and we're importing the product into New Zealand. That is applicable. And what do we do with the rest of the documentation if it includes other parts of it? Do we need that, or can we ignore it? What do we do with it?
Yeah, that's a special case where you take the relevant part of it. You can absolutely do that and ignore, everything that's kind of European domestic. But it's a little bit more of a bespoke customization to do that. But it's, the manufacturing process won't change, so you can still use that information. It's still very valuable.
Yeah. Is that a minimum? If you're going to do embodied carbon, would you need to calculate A1 to A3 to be of value to the market, or is there something else you could do?
Yeah, that's kind of the minimum. That's and typically more is required as well, that you want to understand distribution, installation, and if you have a product which requires, maintenance and replacement and all that stuff, you do want to include that. So A1 to A3 is absolutely the bare minimum. Yeah.
Okay. And so for product manufacturers who want to get into the space, just again, a reminder, what would be the first steps without putting $1 forward? What would be the first steps to go and do?
I think considering the complexity of this space, I think first to have a hard look at what actually will give you benefit and what you need to make it effective. Is it an EPD? Is it this type of certification? What's actually going to make a difference to me? And have that kind of do that really thoroughly upfront before you invest a significant amount of cash and resources into a specific path. It's we see it too often. People get knee-jerk reactions to go with something shiny, but then at the end of the day, and some end up, as many of you know, with a number of different certifications that they then have to maintain because they've been asked for a specific project or demanded, and it can become a little bit costly and unmanageable to maintain all that.
Okay. All right. Well, Sam, have we got any other questions? I think I covered off a few of them in there, but are there any other questions?
Yes, we do have. We have 3 questions in total. The first 2, I think, have been already addressed by you, Mark, through the presentation and the demonstration. The first one was about how manufacturers and suppliers submit their environmental certifications, and that's through the the supplier tab, eCert Manage on our website, on the Masterspec website. And the second one is about a question from Sarah asking if our EPD is already on with Masterspec and in our company website. Is this enough, or does it need to be on another platform?
EPD needs to be published through an EPD program to be strictly compliant. So they need to be published through a program and on their website as well.
Yeah. So if I could answer Sarah too, that we wouldn't publish a site on the product on eCert unless it is on one of those other sites. Effectively, it needs to be a third-party verified EN 15804 or 14025 document for us to even do that, and so that will have had to been published somewhere else previously. The interesting thing is that they're internationally, not all of the documentation is even on one site. It's all over the place a little bit at the moment. So, you know, there is stuff obviously on the Australian site, there is stuff internationally on the Eco site, but they don't necessarily match 100. But there is documentation. You just have to go and look for it. If you need to go and find the right place for it, I suggest you go and have a look at those couple of sites which Jonas actually outlined. If you go as a product manufacturer, if you're looking for your supplier's information, go and have a look there.
Thanks for that, Mark. And Jonas, there's another question here. There's two more actually. There's one more that's been added. So I'll read the first one from Mr. Smith here. The question is that there can be a huge impact for some products in stages A4 to A5, B and C. Example, insulation products which use blowing agents which off-gas during construction, only using A1 to A3 risks missing these impacts. How can policy be developed to make sure this isn't missed?
Completely agree, and that's why there's a push to include more complete life cycle embodied carbon in the EPDs, and A1 to A3 is only really for product where it's not reasonable or practical to do it, like cement, bagged cement or something like that. So I completely agree. It's probably more how EPDs are used that we need to educate decision makers to actually look at the whole life cycle and not just take a shortcut and look at A1 to A3. The Green Building Council's upfront embodied carbon that does A1 to A5, I feel like that's a limitation as well, because it doesn't recognize benefits on durability, low maintenance, low emissions after the product is installed. So I would push for whole life cycle comparisons at all cases. So I agree with you, Stephen, on that one.
Great. Thanks, Jonas. And lastly, because we're going over time, I'll just blitz through this. Please be specific. That question is please be specific on the cost of a supplier of another company's product as a reseller that has an EPD, permission to use it, cost under their own brand.
Oh, so I think that he's asking if we have a document previous from another supplier and we want to repurpose it and rebrand it as us, what would the cost of that be?
Yeah, that's need to look at that on a case-by-case basis, but it would be significantly less because you would avoid a lot of that data collection, which actually drives the investment there. So it's a little bit more of the exception to do that, but it's actually absolutely the way we should do it, because it's supposed to be these jigsaw pieces that fit together, and we use the work that's been done up and down supply chains.
Brilliant.
Cool. I think that's all the questions that we got for today. Thank you, Jonas. Thank you, David. Thank you, Mark. Yep.
Okay. Guys, again, thanks for your time. Very valuable for us. I'm hopeful our product partners got some value out of it. So Edge have given us time to do this. Edge Impact have given us time to do this, and fantastic that you've actually come on board and had a bit of a chat about it. They've partnered up with us to talk about embodied carbon mostly, but also just the general sustainability information. So thank you very much for your time, and I appreciate that, and hopefully everybody's got a little bit more value out of it, and maybe a little more contact around the industry about what to do or where to look for this information. So again, thanks for your time, and product partners, if you've got any queries, please fire them to us. We're happy to chat about that at any stage. and we can direct you to the right place, or even give you some information on whether it's eCerts, embodied carbon, sustainability documentation. We're here to help. Thanks very much for your time.
Thanks all. Thank you.
Ta-ra.